everybody. I am Karen Fox with NASA's Office of Communications, and we are segueing into the public Q&A portion of this meeting. As a reminder, this is a FACA meeting, that is a Federal Advisory Committee Act, and so we are under guidance which says that these meetings are public and that we take public questions. We got hundreds and hundreds of questions, and I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to everybody who submitted them. We're obviously not going to get to all of them today, but we are going to make attempts to answer some of them online. You can always check back to science.nasa.gov/UAP, where over time we will make it clear where we're putting out some more of those answers. In the meantime, we did have to make some decisions. We stuck to questions that applied to this independent study and UAPs. There were a lot of questions about astrobiology and other subjects that we're not going to get to today. And also, in an attempt to get to as many of the questions as possible, since so many of them were similar, we've sort of bucketed them. And that is how we're going to try to address as many as possible. So I'm going to toss the questions to you, and we'll look to getting some answers for our public questions. All right. So first set of questions are specifically about the data being used. So examples. What exactly are you incorporating into your report? What data are we using? What are some examples of data being used? Do we have multi-sensor data or of objects performing maneuvers that seem truly anomalous? Do we have photos, videos? What about having the NASA historian go through the NASA's historical records? Did you interview military or pilots for this study? So looking for some information about the kinds of data. I can toss to anyone. David looks like he's jumping in.
Well, I think first and foremost, our goal here is really to create a roadmap, right? So really, we have been informed by some of the events that are reported, and we've had, but we've certainly not done a complete historical study in an archive. And I think one of the things we've wanted to do was learn what kinds of events have been reported, learn about some of the ones that have been resolved, some of the ones that are unresolved, so we can best think about how in the future we can collect data so that we can get more robust answers. So that, I hope that addressed that question.
It does.
Others have anything else they'd like to add?
All right. Then I will keep going. Another big question category was about transparency and about sharing information. And so examples in this category are, what is NASA hiding and where are you hiding it? How much has been shared publicly? Has NASA ever cut the live NASA TV feed away from something? Has NASA released all UAP evidence it has ever received? What about NASA astronauts? Do they have an NDA or clearance that does not allow them to speak about UAP sightings? What are the science overlords hiding? Dan Evans.
All right, I'll take a stab at that one. I really want to assure the public and to double down on some remarks I made this morning that this agency is absolutely cast iron committed to openness and transparency and honesty. And that commitment also extends to our live NASA TV feeds. They provide real-time footage from our various missions. Now, to my knowledge, NASA has never intentionally cut a live feed to hide anything, and that includes UAPs, of course. Sometimes there are interruptions to our feeds, but that is simply because space is a complex place. There's a vast array of natural phenomena, human-made objects, and so forth. But again, I wanted to reassure the public that we're absolutely committed to providing the public transparency and openness. Those are the hallmarks of NASA. That's why we're here today in public on TV, because we want the public to have the opportunity to see the process of this committee doing its work in public. It's only right.
Just to follow up on what I said, I didn't mean to joke about it, but in my 20 years at NASA, no one, either officially or unofficially, in my recollection, have ever discussed or briefed us or had any kind of discussions about anything that would be considered a UAP or UFO or anything like that.
And I'll ask you to stand for 1 second and state your name. I'll ask you to stand for 1 second and state your name, just so everybody know
Okay,
who was
yeah.
speaking. It's
I'm
hard
sorry,
to see in the
Scott
back.
Kelly. I'm just following up on the question about if NASA astronauts ever signed an NDA or anything of that, anything like that. In my experience of being in the astronaut office for 20 years, there was never any formal or informal discussions at all about UAPs or UFOs or anyone reporting anything that would suggest something from, beyond our planet.
Thank you very much. Yes, please.
Just want to make a quick comment about the culture of science in relation to this question. Scientists by nature are at least intellectually sort of rebellious. It's in our nature to question authority. That's how you're a good scientist. You don't just take someone's word for it. You try to discover the truth. And for that reason, this question about what are the science overlords hiding, that's sort of written in a facetious way. But I just want to emphasize that there's no way that all scientists could be in on trying to hide something, because it's just not in our nature. If somebody told me to try to hide something as a scientist, that would just increase my desire to belay that order and to release it. And I think that's true of our community in general.
All right, thank you so much. I am going to go on to our third set of questions, which is, has NASA been tracking Earth's atmosphere, or are we also studying bodies of water for UAP? I think that's a Dan question
Maybe it's a polar
for
question.
NASA, or?
Is that a me question?
Yeah.
Oh,
Here's the oceanographer. My understanding is this is a completely independent study to assess what assets, what data, what science, what observations, platforms NASA has to potentially help evaluate and understand UAP, right? We have, NASA has an Earth Science division and many scientists at many centers and many academics and other partners out there that study the Earth as a system. We do this from the unique vantage point of space, and the atmosphere is part of that. I think Dr. Kirkpatrick stated this morning that to his knowledge, and I think to ours, there isn't anything that's been reported below the ocean surface, and so I think part of what we've been talking about all day is, what assets are out there to actually begin to identify data that could be useful in explaining any of these reports if and should they come in. So I think that's probably it, unless there's something else to add.
all right then, thank you. Moving on to our fourth general bucket of questions. What are you doing to solve the stigmatization surrounding the study of UAP?
I can take that one.
And state your name if you wouldn't mind first.
Carlin Toner, FAA. I think the fact that NASA has called us together here as a panel to look into this, that NASA is hosting a public meeting, that we've heard, right, it clearly stated we're here to be transparent. I think that's the first step in trying to really normalize the study of UAPs. And we talked a little bit earlier about the reporting, about how to make it credible. And we talked also about UAP in one of the earlier talks this morning of the definition of the A, whether it was aerial or anomalous, as the legislation now is. And really the distinction beyond UFOs, right? When we're looking at UAPs here, we're beyond just airplanes. We're looking at all types of anomalous phenomena. And so that's just a more inclusive term there.
Yeah, still Mike Gold. Just wanted to emphasize what Carlin said, which is so accurate. I really consider it quite amazing that we're here having this discussion. NASA leadership deserves great kudos for this. And beyond, I think a recommendation that I'd like to make is that NASA participate in symposia, in panels, sponsor research. when you have the NASA logo on that sponsored research, on the discussion, it really helps normalize and push back against the stigma. I think NASA can leverage its excellent reputation, both domestically and abroad, to help push back on that stigma. I think it's important to do so not just for science and discovery, but for national security. That we've all seen what's occurred with balloons from rival nations. We don't want this stigma to be a vulnerability that rival nations can take advantage of.
Yes, Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Just a few additional points from the agency perspective. We are, of course, taking a set of actions to effectively normalize the study of UAPs, and that involves collaborating across the government, encouraging an open dialogue, and promoting rigorous scientific inquiry. Let me turn to each of those in turn. So in terms of promoting a rigorous scientific inquiry, the primary way we're doing this is by being truly rigorous and employing an evidence-based methodology in everything that we do. That is characteristic of scientific research. It's no accident that the people up on this stage are true experts in their respective fields, okay? So that is in turn going to help us to legitimize UAP studies. Encouraging open dialogue. So by holding public meetings such as this one and having open conversations about findings, then we're helping to normalize discussions again. And that really goes arm in arm with our commitment to openness and transparency with the public. And then finally, in terms of collaborating across the government, we're working very closely with other government agencies, not least Sean's office, Aero, to broaden the scope and the depth of our study. And I honestly believe that this collective interagency approach will lend credibility to the study of UAPs, and it's going to demonstrate the seriousness with which we're approaching this issue. Thanks.
Well, that segues very nicely into what our next set of questions are, which is who we are working with. So the question is, who else is NASA currently working with, or do we want to work with to study UAP? And is NASA working with international partners?
All right. Pete, do you want to do it?
I'll take a stab at it.
Okay.
As the questions tasked to this panel so kindly asked us, both in what other government agencies are collecting data, what data is available. NASA is partnering with them in many ways, as well as NASA has a wide commercial outreach and partnerships with understanding what data is available, as well as NASA's founded on well, not founded, but the core principles of NASA are with international partners. So the information that our partners are gathering is typically available to NASA as well. So yes, on all accounts.
And I may just emphasize and add that NASA is singular, I believe, among government agencies in its international outreach. Again, not to keep talking about the Artemis Accords, but you see countries like Saudi Arabia that we may not have a great relationship with as a government right now. We have Saudi Arabia and Israel in the Accords family, so that NASA is unique in its scope and ability to reach out. I also think that we're entering a new era of commercial space transportation that is going from low Earth orbit out to cislunar space. And that is going to be the purview of the Department of Commerce, which is taking over space traffic management. So I think it's very important that NASA work with and support commerce as we go through that transition. Department of Defense is currently responsible for that. And I think that will help us not only to identify potential UAPs, but to assist in preventing contention, congestion, and eventually conflict. And I also want to note, in terms of space debris in orbit right now, I believe, represents an existential threat to our very society, that we are getting very close to an event that could cause real problems for our ability to access satellites. And that's why I think there's great ancillary benefits to the conversation we're having today, that as we increase our capability to monitor orbit for UAPs, that data could also be very relevant as we look at near-Earth objects and other threats. And again, to just end on near-Earth objects, Apophis, for example, an asteroid, is going to come so close to Earth, it will be below geosynchronous satellites. So any effort to begin to catalog and do better in terms of understanding that environment is going to be terrific, and I hope NASA works with commerce and international agencies on Apophis and other missions.
I think Federica had something to say too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, a lot of the things that we think we might recommend in terms of platforms to collect data that would be useful to study UAPs, we recommend a multi-platform and multi-site. That would also mean likely ground-based as well as space-based facilities. And this is being done already in astrophysics, co-observing the sky from the ground and from space with different methodologies and different instruments to get a more comprehensive picture of what's normal and then detect what's anomalous. And about every 10 years, the astrophysics community anyways, but many other branches, convene a panel of experts to see what things can be done to advance the field in the next decade. It's called the Decadal Survey for us. And one of the recommendations this year was explicitly for agencies that do astrophysics to work together. So NSF, DOE, and NASA to work together, share data, share facilities and instruments. So I think this is, there's a lot of fields will benefit from this, including the UAP studies.
Oh, absolutely.
Carlin Toner, I'd like to put an exclamation point on how well NASA is collaborating across the government. I'm from the FAA, and I can personally attest that FAA and NASA have a robust engagement in transferring research into practice in the ATM system. I think on the commercial space side, we work well with NASA. And all of our agencies are in the whole of government approach, supporting Aero specifically on the UAP topic. And it really comes down to good government and how we deliver, because we can each work our own mission space, but to cover the whole space, we need to collaborate together.
And Dan?
To put an exclamation point on Carlin's exclamation point. So I think it's important to say that we really do have a good relationship with the Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Aero, Sean's office, and its previous or predecessor organization, the UAP Task Force, and we have really benefited from very fruitful collaborations among those various entities. And quite frankly, as a taxpayer, one should expect nothing less than the government to be working effectively across different units together. It's only right. That being said, it's also important to acknowledge what NASA's perspective is in this study, and to acknowledge that the Department of Defense, the intelligence community have massively different equities about the study of UAP, and they have different interests. Ours is a purely scientific one. So we collaborate, we consult. It's a very good relationship. And I agree wholeheartedly with Carlin that a whole of government approach is absolutely the right one to take.
Great, thank you. I will move on to our sixth bucket of questions, which we had many on this topic. Is there evidence that UAP were created from non-human intelligence?
All right.
Yes, please.
I will take this one. First and foremost, we are scientists, and we follow the scientific process, and I hope that the gathering here today showed a little bit of a glimpse on how the scientific process works. It's not a question that you can answer very quickly with yes or no, and we follow the data, right? So as scientists, we follow the data, we formulate hypotheses, we test theories, we follow the scientific process. The role of this panel has been to create a roadmap and a framework for how all scientists that are interested in this phenomenon can further study, can further collect data, can further formulate experiments, again, hypotheses, can test different methods, maybe even innovate on the methodology side of things, come up with new methods for how we can do basically science, but not just any kind of science, but a science of discovery and exploration, which is basically in the spirit of NASA. So just like Carl Sagan was saying, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We cannot make that kind of extraordinary claims at all for any kind of big subjects in science, whether it's UAPs, whether it's biosignatures, whether it's technosignatures. This question of whether we are alone in the universe is probably one of the largest questions that we've had in our history of science, in our history of humanity, and it's not one that we can take lightly, and that's why we need so many scientists and multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary teams to work together, and many organizations. So it's a process, it's a roadmap, and we work collectively on this, and we hope that within our lifetime we will be able to answer this big question of whether we are alone or not, and also to better characterize this phenomenon, which is UAPs.
I want to sort of supplement that excellent answer by noting that we have not seen the extraordinary evidence, right? I mean, in a sense, to give, to make the claim that we see something that is evidence of, non-human intelligence would require extraordinary evidence, and we have not seen that. I think that's important to make clear.
All right, then, I will move on to our seventh set of questions. We received many questions about the budget that is being dedicated to this. How large of a budget will NASA allocate? How large of a budget is NASA allocating? And how large of a budget will NASA allocate towards the study of UAPs? Dan?
Yeah, that's a Dan question. So there are two separate questions in there, which is, what is the budget for this group, this team, and what is the budget going forward, I think. Now, the budget for this independent study team is very consistent with any other of our external review groups that we bring into the Science Mission Directorate on an annual basis. So, we have maybe 100, 200 such groups, entirely consistent with that. Also important to say going forward now that NASA has not established a program relative to UAP. And as a result, there's no associated programmatic funding. But this is how NASA works. Federal budgeting is a complex journey, of course, and the way NASA, particularly NASA Science, likes to work is we anticipate and wait recommendations from independent groups such as this one, and we need to wait on final recommendations, and then we'll make an assessment. So too early to say, but of course that's all couched in the fact that federal budgeting is a very complex process, and we will always follow the law.
All right, we're making good time. We have one more question that encompassed many of the ones we got, which is, has NASA encountered any aliens or extraterrestrial life? What happens if the public comes across extraterrestrial life? What would NASA do if extraterrestrial life was discovered? What would NASA study or do if extraterrestrial life was discovered? Now, I think it's worth making a distinction that when we talk about extraterrestrial life, we do have a study within NASA of astrobiology, which is not intelligent life necessarily. And so I invite you, as you answer this question, to make clear the distinctions as you are talking in terms of UAPs as well as any astrobiology work that we do.
I would start by saying one of NASA's big questions is there life out there? Right, and a lot of what NASA's doing in its exploration of the solar system and beyond is focused on searching for life in any form, extraterrestrial life. I think one of the things we have learned in the past 20 years is planets are common. We knew, of course, about the planets in our solar system, but we now know there are lots of planets out there. So there are lots of potential environments for life. And I think one of the most fascinating questions is, do any of those planets host life? And that's something that NASA is trying to address in a host of different ways, whether it's probes that are landing on planets or designing missions that will look for signatures of life around other planets. So the search for life is a really important theme. We haven't found life beyond Earth yet, right? I mean, let's be clear about this. We haven't found it yet. But we're looking, and we're looking for it in lots of different ways. And, David was discussing technosignatures as one way that we can look both within our solar system and beyond. And there's a lot of different elements, I think, of this potential search. And, just to go back to something that was phrased in an earlier question, is NASA hiding anything about this? No. This is actually what, answering this question is one of the things that NASA as an agency is excited about. It's something that lots of scientists working with NASA are excited about is this question of, is there life out there? And I think one of the things that makes this question of are we alone such a central question, not just to the scientific community, it's a central question, I think, for the public. I suspect there are more people watching this than the typical episode of NASA TV, right? And this is something where we will have media coming to the press conference, because these questions touch on something that I think is really a deep question for humanity, is are we alone in the universe?
Yeah, just to kind of echo what David said a bit, I mean, obviously this is something we think a lot about in astrobiology. What if we succeed? We are very driven to try to find real evidence of extraterrestrial life, and we would be highly driven to share that if we found it, because everyone wants to show that they've been able to succeed in what they're trying to do. And one perhaps illustrative example is to think about what happened when we came close, when NASA thought maybe they had discovered extraterrestrial life. And a big event, actually, in the history of astrobiology was in the 1990s, when some scientists had thought that they had discovered fossils in a meteorite that came from Mars. And what happens is, you don't announce it immediately. You make sure that you try to make sure you're right, because you also don't want to have false alarms and announce something and then you go, oops, sorry, we were wrong. That was a mistaken analysis. But what happened was, when the scientists were sure they were right, then there was a big, in fact, presidential press conference with President Clinton and NASA, and it was a big public announcement. And that's what would happen. If we discovered something, we would try to make sure we were right, and then we would very proudly and loudly let the public know about it.
Thanks. We have just 1 minute left, so I'll let you finish up.
Yeah, thank you. The only thing I wanted to add, I wouldn't at all liken it to alien or extraterrestrial life, but in astrobiology and exobiology, there is the exploration of our planet as an analog for what might be found on other worlds, and what is extreme cold, what is extreme heat, a volcano, a black smoker at the bottom of the ocean, what lives there, and how is that even possible? And things we still discover throughout our ocean might look alien to a lot of people, right? And we keep discovering new species of different things, whether they be microbes or algae or, charismatic megafauna, whatever they are. But there are synergies. I know there was an initiative years ago at NASA called Oceans Across the Solar System, and the idea was, could our own Earth's ocean be used and the life within it as an analog for what might be discovered elsewhere? So I think that's an example of a potential synergy of interdisciplinary science, research, observations, etc., collection of data and information gathering that could be useful in the future.
Thank you all so much. I will hand it back to David Spergel, your chair.